YouTube, and welcome to Virtual History Tours. Today we're in Hopkinton, Massachusetts to take a look at the old hunting and fishing clubs that once existed on Pine Island Road, or Piney Island Cart Path, as it was once called. Pine Island Road extends from Milford, Mass. into Hopkinton, and you actually cannot get to Pine Island Road from the Hopkinton side because the eastern shoreline was never developed past this point here on the end of Lakeshore Drive. And the same goes for Pine Island Road. Pine Island Road ends here at this stream which runs down into the lake. And the road really never continued past there. But in the times that I'm looking at, 1830, at that time, a family named Parkhurst owned this property, or had purchased it, I should say. So let's take a look at a little bit of the history of how this peninsula became flooded and the clubs and camps that existed along Pine Island Road. So what's important to remember here is that the lake was much smaller back in the 1830s, before 1833, when a new dam was constructed, and that flooded the lake to its present state. And the original dam was about 150 feet from the present dam, and you can see that right here. This is approximately where it would have been. This was a peninsula that stuck out. Now these are two islands. And on the Pine Island Road side, we also have areas which really the whole shoreline was flooded 20 to 30 feet back from where it was, I should say. And these two areas here, where the peninsula was highest, once it was flooded, these also became islands. But in the 1830s, we find the first land transaction at the Worcester County Registry of Deeds, and this is between Clark Fisk and John Parkhurst. And the Parkhurst family purchased this land, which included what is Piney Island. Later on, what happened was the mills downstream, Draper Mills in Hopedale, and several other mills all the way down to the Blackstone River, wanted to create a greater headwater during dry times, and they petitioned to expand the lake, to build a bigger dam, to raise the lake, and they went about purchasing land all around the lake where it was to be flooded. And one of these men was named Aaron Claflin. Aaron Claflin was a boot and shoe manufacturer. He was originally from Milford and moved to New York City to operate a dry goods business. He had purchased several tracts of land around the lake and dam in the 1860s and 70s from men with the last names of Ball, Wood, Parkhurst, and Eames. As a matter of fact, upon his death, his obituary mentioned that he was the largest landowner in Milford. After his death, his son Charles Claflin became one of the founders of the Milford Water Company. In the beginning of the 1830s, 9 owners of mills incorporated themselves to raise the lake to provide a greater headwater for their mills downstream. Records dated October 16, 1833, found at the Worcester Registry of Deeds reveal that at that time, 9 owners of mills, starting at a privilege just below the dam and running down Mill River to Woonsocket, Rhode Island, where the Mill River joins the Blackstone River, associated themselves for the purpose of constructing and maintaining a reservoir to raise and preserve a head of water to serve the mills on the river during dry periods. According to the document, these individuals expended $2,100 in the purchase of the right and privilege of flowing certain lands in and about the reservoir and in the construction of a dam. So Mr. Parkhurst sold most of his land to Aaron Claflin when he was buying up land to be flooded. However, a small portion still remained in the Parkhurst family after the lake was flooded in 1833. And that was this island right here. And the Parkhurst family actually owned this piece of property until 1849, when Lucy Parkhurst and others sold the island to Justin Ames. And it wasn't long until Aaron Claflin finally acquired it from Ames. In 1888, Herman Crosby, Addison Tyler, Emmons Fletcher, Fred Gibson, and Clarence Gordon, all of Milford, Mass., became the owners of the first club camp on Lake Maspenock, and it was located on this island. Unfortunately for Crosby and his crew, 2 years later, the dam was found to be unsafe, and they left the gates open for the next 10 years. So we now move on to 1901, which is the date that the dam was repaired, the gate was closed, and the lake was reflooded. And at that time, Charles F. Claflin, son of Aaron Claflin and one of the founders of the Milford Water Company, combined and sold several tracts of land that his father had purchased to a man named Andrew McEwen. Mr. McEwen owned a cigar and ice cream shop in downtown Milford, and Milford at one time was a major producer of cigars, believe it or not. As it turns out, Mr. McEwen's shop burned down in 1890, and 10 years later, it looks like he was in the real estate business. Immediately after purchasing the land from Charles Claflin in 1901, McEwen began subdividing lots and selling them. So when Charles Claflin sold the land to Andrew McEwen in 1901, it included a stipulation of a right-of-way down Piney Island Cart Path, as it was known then, through land of Ferguson to Camp Street. And all of the deeds in the Hopkinton side of Pine Island Road have that stipulation still in them today. And that carries all the way from 1833. We can see here, if we drop a map of Milford at around 1890 or so, we see the land of Mary Ferguson, but there is no road here where Pine Island Road is. So this is the piece of land here that's being stipulated on those deeds as a right-of-way that Charles Claflin left available to McEwen, so that the plots of land that he was going to sell up here had a way out, and it was through Pine Island Cart Path down through here to Camp Street that they would have taken their horse teams back in the day. So let's take a look at the land that Mr. McEwen sold to, I believe it was friends and acquaintances or people that he knew somehow. A lot of these deeds the land was sold for $1 and valuable other considerations. And there was a notation for Andrew McEwen in a book of merchants. I can't recall the reference right now, but it mentions something about him having many, many friends. So I don't know if these plots of land were just given off to his friends, but let's take a look at what Mr. McEwen did with the land that he purchased from Charles Claflin. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so that we can get the entire location, because there were some clubs that were up on this side of the lake too. So this is the camp locations and the years built for Andrew McEwen's deeds that are in the Middlesex County Registry of Deeds. And we can see here that the same year that Mr. McEwen purchased these is when he sold. And anything with an et al. Here is going to be a deed that had multiple men's names on them. And we're going to assume those were the clubs. Some of them were just one person, Margaret Glennon. This property was built also in 1901. And in 1960, it was purchased by a lady named Dot Redden. Dot lived on the lake for many, many years. Her house was the first house on Pine Island Road to be electrified. She was the first full-time resident of the Hopkinton side of Pine Island Road, and her house was torn down a couple of years ago, and a beautiful new home is being built there now. William and Charles DeVoren, brothers. William owned a larger plot here, and in 1925 he split it off for his brother to have a little cottage, and that's at 64 Pine Island Road now. At 66 Pine Island Road, that wasn't built until 1907. That was built by the Joy brothers and a man named Fred Boutwell. So it was 3 people originally in this cottage. And the Joy brothers were sons of Moses Joy Jr., who was another founder of the Milford Water Company. Next door to that was an original cottage, 1901 cottage. It was the Hopedale Hunters Rest Club. This was a small cottage that was purchased in 1917 by a man named Rudolph Mainini. Mr. Mainini was from Framingham and was a real estate speculator and owned a lot of land around the lake. He actually owned this large plot of land back here that was purchased around the year 2000 by EMC Corporation. But at one point in time, the man that owned this plot here owned all of this land. And there's an interesting story about Mr. Mainini. I'm not sure what year it was, but the original Pine Island cart path would have run down here and down along the shoreline and out. And at one point, Mr. Mainini extended the road to a circle, which is what it is now. There's a circle here. And what he wanted to do was close off the original Pine Island cart path and have everyone travel this way down to these cottages. And he was going to develop the shoreline up here where Pine Island Road is. However, Mr. Snow, who owned this property here, didn't like that idea and put a stop to it and made sure that his family continued to use the original road so that Mr. Mainini couldn't take it and utilize it for developing lots here. So that's kind of an interesting story. The Cheneys, a very prominent family down on Camp Street in Milford. One of the Cheneys owned the brick mansion that sits at the corner of Camp Street and Purchase Street, and a beautiful old mansion. So their family retained this little half of this island, and these islands were connected sometime after the lake was reflooded. They were actual islands, but now they've got a little string of land that connects them to the main shoreline here. And of course, we have next door to that, on the other side of the island, was a man named Hickey and his club mates. This was built in 1916. The house was torn down in the early 2000s, and there's a new house that stands there now. And then we have these couple of camps here, which were built in the early 1920s, 1918, and the Snow family has owned this for 5 generations. Steve Snow lives there now, and that piece of property was torn down. The little cottage that his grandfather had was torn down, and they built a new cottage there as well. Of course, we have our Crosby gang that started in 1888 here on Piney Island. And then we have some other clubs here that have really been lost to history. They're no longer existing. The shoreline is really just filled back in with trees and shrubs, and it looks like the original shoreline. But back in 1904, there were 3 clubs that existed over here on this part of the shoreline. Now, there really was never any access, and still is not any access to these plots of land from Pine Island Road, because we've got a couple of streams, small little rivers that run down through and into the lake here. And it looks like this is where they kind of ended the road and never crossed it. There was a plan put through in the 1930s to extend it, but that never happened. Um, and right now, these three properties are under consideration of being bought for conservation by the town of Hopkinton, so that's good news. We don't know much about the Only Club or the Kennel Club. The only thing that we know about the Kennel Club is it's referenced in the deed for Gillen et al. In 1901 as being the location of the Golden Spring, and every single one of these pieces of properties on the deeds and existing on the deeds today for the residents of Pine Island Road is a stipulation that they have a right of way to cross over Pine Island Cart Path to the Golden Stream, so called, that all of the Pine Island residents have rights and access to, is located in this vicinity here somewhere. And the actual stipulation on the deeds for it specifies that they can take water from the spring by dipping with pails or glasses, but not otherwise. So that's kind of neat. Jerry Rogers, who as a very young girl with her parents lived in this cottage down in this area right here, wrote in her memoir that a boat carried us diagonally across the lake to the bubbling spring where we scooped our buckets of drinking water. The spring was a refrigerator for those lucky ones who lived near it. Soft drinks and milk bottles sat cooling in the little cold stream that trickled from the spring into the lake. I was frequently elected to fetch the spring water. My mother feared boats, and for many years, after I had become expert at rowing and swimming, she insisted that I row along the shore for this trip. I still recall the exhilarating experience of rowing by myself across the deep water to the spring. Now, I don't have any pictures of the Only Club or the Kennel Club, but I do have a couple of pictures of the Wabeek Club. The Wabeek Club no longer exists. It fell into its foundation probably 10 years ago or so. But I do have this photo here that I took probably around 2000, 2002, something like that, of what was left of the Wabeek Club back then. And I also have this postcard view that was taken from 1911 titled North Pond, the Boat Launch at Wabeek Cottage, Milford, Massachusetts. Right around the Depression, the clubs like the Only Club, the Kennel Club, and the Wabeek Club really weren't being used any longer, and the town of Hopkinton was not receiving their tax money from it, and several of the properties were taken from the owners by the town for taxes being delinquent in the 1930s. This was so much a problem for the town of Hopkinton that in the Lakeshore Drive deeds, there's a stipulation that no fraternal organization or club can own the properties. So I think what happened was the town got burned, and they wanted to make sure that the rest of the development on the lake was going to be by private ownership. The island here, there is still a structure on the island. I don't know if it's the original cottage been added onto, or if subsequently other structures were put onto the island or not. For the most part, all of these have been pretty much rebuilt. This cottage right here, the next to the last on Pine Island Road, the owner passed away a few years back, and that has most of the original cottage. This piece of property that is right here is where the small little cottage that they used to use as a storage facility for horses, to stable the horses, and they would store products that a man named Flanagan would sell on a store that he had on the island in the early 1920s. And I have this picture, which was taken, and this picture is of his horses in front of that cottage and in front of Piney Island. So that's kind of neat. I like that picture a lot. So with that, I'm going to close out this episode on Pine Island Road, and I hope that you enjoyed it. There was a lot of information to go through here. If you're interested in the Lake Maspenock history, you can go to maspenock.com, maspenock.com. And that's a website that I put together that has all of the reference materials and other information to go along with this video. So thanks for visiting. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I hope you'll visit again. Thanks a lot.